Fossil fuel companies and those who advance their interests stand accused of trying to thwart the transition to renewable energy sources. The accusation is made in an opinion piece in the New York Times by Andrew Dessler, Professor of Atmospheric Sciences at Texas A&M University. Among the tactics fossil fuel interests use, he says, are trying to convince the public that renewable energy is not as reliable, in a campaign similar to that of Big Tobacco, which tried to convince the public that its products didn't harm people's health. Last week, the UN Secretary-General dubbed fossil fuel companies the godfathers of climate chaos and said they should be banned in every country from advertising. Professor Dessler told me why he believes fossil fuel companies are trying to halt the transition towards renewable energy.
The fossil fuel industry is doing several things to oppose the transition to renewable energy. They're spreading misinformation about renewable energy. They are working with legislators that they give enormous amounts of money to pass laws that disadvantage renewable energy. And they're doing stuff like working on textbooks to give to grade school kids that promote fossil fuels while downplaying the impacts of climate change. They're essentially running a full court press on the public to try to convince them that fossil fuels are our only option.
I mean, it could be argued that once it becomes clear that renewables are cheaper, the battle is over.
Sure, that's what everyone always said. Once renewable energy gets cheaper, the market will pivot away. But in fact, fossil fuels are working to stop that. I mean, they are working with legislators to pass laws to disadvantage fossil fuels. They are working with legislators to disadvantage electric cars. They're doing all these things to keep the market from pivoting because they're making so much money now that they just don't want to turn off the tap.
I mean, following on from that, we have a statement from the American Petroleum Institute, which represents fossil fuel companies. They say they are, and I quote, poised to be a leader in the next generation of low carbon technologies, including CCS and hydrogen. So again, they would argue that they're actually part of the solution and not just the problem.
Yeah, I mean, what do you expect them to say? It's like when Vladimir Putin says that Russia had no choice but to invade Ukraine. I mean, they're obviously trying to paint themselves in the best light. But, make no mistake, they are behind a lot of the efforts to slow down a transition to what would be a better world for most people.
Have you tried in any way to take the fight to them to counteract their campaign?
Well, I mean, I'm a college professor, so
yes, I appreciate
there's only so much I do. And one of the things I try to do is I try to call them out whenever I can, which is what I did in my New York Times op-ed, what I'm doing right now, talking to y'all. What I want people to understand is that we can largely switch off fossil fuels with existing technology. And it won't cost us any more money. And this is a message fossil fuel interests do not want people to understand. And they are going through a lot of effort to make sure people are confused about that.
Okay, so you're not taking the fight to them, but is anybody trying to counteract what you say is a misinformation campaign by the fossil fuel companies?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there are a lot of people out there fighting, but you have to realize the asymmetric nature of this fight. Fossil fuels are probably the most powerful economic industry that's ever existed in the history of humanity. They have trillions of dollars of revenue at their disposal. They have essentially infinite amounts of money. There's nobody that can compete with that. So they can pay politicians, they can pay people to go out and spread misinformation. And it's they spend a few million here and a few million there, and then they make $1 trillion in profit. I mean, it's a fantastic investment for them to do this.
I mean, I quoted the UN Secretary General just then, and it would seem at the highest levels of international government, there is an awareness of what the fossil fuel companies are doing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think everybody understands. It's very much like tobacco. People understood what the tobacco companies were doing. And, people at the highest echelons of power understand fossil fuels. But they also, if you're a politician in Texas and you want to get reelected, you've got to walk that line or you're not going to get reelected. And so there's a strong incentive for policymakers to essentially legislate on behalf of fossil fuel companies, not on behalf of the citizens.
Okay.
And they're trying to help fossil fuel companies, and it produces a worse world for everyone else.
That was Andrew Dessler, Professor of Atmospheric Sciences at Texas A&M University. And the American Petroleum Institute also told us the industry is focused on continuing to produce affordable, reliable energy while tackling the climate challenge, and any allegations to the contrary are false. The US oil and natural gas industry, it said, has contributed to the significant progress the US has made in reducing America's CO2 emissions to near generational lows with the increased use of natural gas.